What is something illegal you have done and got away without getting caught? I brought 2 or 3 Cuban cigars back to the US from Montreal once. When we cleared the border, I turned to my parents and used my favorite line from Futurama. Guess what your accessories to? Edit. It was 2004. I am well aware this is no longer illegal. I stole my own car from the tow impound lot. Best part was getting the certified letter months later that they were going to auction it if I didn't come and pay for it. You should have gone back with the letter and demanded to see the car. My friends and I didn't pay for our dinner at Steak and Shake this past weekend. I stood waiting at the register trying to pay for 20 minutes, but no one came to take my money. It was 12:30 a.m. before we left. Stole a Blue Angels flag from the hangar they were parked in. When I was in the Navy, the Blue Angels visited the airbase I was stationed at. They proceeded to kick all of our planes out of our hangar and I had to fix our birds out in the rain. In a fit of contempt on the last day they were there, I went into the mezz and stole the flag hanging from the overhead beams. I still have the flag and wear it like a cape from time to time. I once kept a dead otter in my freezer after finding it on the side of the road. In the UK this can get a hefty fine and prison time without a license. Once I found out, I released the dead otter into the wild. It was a bit like Free Willy but with less movement. I stole the police radio from a TABC officer once, drunk as hell and underage at a club. I was on the dance floor at some club and an elderly lady asked if I wanted to dance. I was like, yeah, cougar action. She then asked me to follow her and I was like, yeah, this lady She then showed me her badge and I was like, Officer took me to the back office of the club and threatened to take me to jail and decided on just giving me a fine. When she went to make a copy of my ID, she left her radio on the desk. I shoved that shit in my pants. I have no clue why I did this. Went outside and called my friends and told them we have to leave. Got in the car and showed them what my drunk ass did and we all had a great laugh. Never paid the ticket and never received a warrant, so I guess I got away with it. I accidentally shoplifted some pudding cups once. I was at Target and was buying a couple of large bags of dog food which were in the basket part of the cart, and several smaller items that were in the top part of the cart. I had tossed the pudding cups into the basket part before I put the dog food bags in, and forgot they were there when I put all the smaller items on the belt to be rung up. They were hidden from view when the dog food bags were scanned. I saw them when I was putting the dog food bags into the trunk. If the lines weren't so long I would have gone back to pay for them. But 20+ minutes for a 99-cent item, I can live with that. If it were a more expensive item I would have returned to pay for it. I trespassed a condo car park to see an expensive car. I pretended I lived there. I bet you took a picture of it too, you monster. Unfortunately it wasn't there. It was a Nice-modified Lamborghini Aventador. I think the owner had moved out. I might have a few pens from work in my drawer at home. This is not an admission of wrongdoing, nor can I attest to how they got there, if they're even there. Worked at a car dealership, broke many finance and insurance fraud laws on a daily basis for years. Most finance managers may not even be aware of it. Please give details. This interests me. I stole a piece of obsidian from biology class. At the next lesson, biology teacher came to our classroom and forced us to admit who stole an obsidian. But I didn't. I found out that this specific guy stole my phone. From checking previous texts on my account and calling numbers they were in contact with. He wouldn't admit he stole it, so I broke into his house via balcony, stole his laptop, and left a cinched note to meet me and return my phone to get his laptop back. It totally worked and everyone got the stuff back. It took me a moment to realize you probably meant signed. Watching porn under 18. You didn't. He wouldn't have. I visited an abandoned building. Someone called the police and 30 minutes later we saw firefighters walking into the huge building just to search us. Luckily we saw it when we were already out. Why would they send firefighters? Are you sure you didn't just accidentally trigger some kind of alarm? Flown with weed in my checked luggage. This happened to me too. Went from Dallas to New York to London to Budapest before I found it. I think that makes me an international drug smuggler. Probably climbing a signal tower in Egypt. I realized afterwards that it was on military land. Then proceeded to climb it another couple of times. Oh, to be young and carefree. I was like 6 years old in a grocery store with my mom. She tells me to hold onto the gallon of apple juice because there was no more room in the cart for it. And I've loved apple juice. So being an absolute compliant little shit, I held onto the juice as she went through the checkout line. Kept holding it as we left to the car on the way home and all the way to the fridge to hand it to her to put it in the right spot. Only then did she realize that we never paid for it. I said, but you told me to hold onto it. She just looks at me dumbfounded, then deadpan tells me not to mention it to anyone else, that it was an accident and that we are keeping it. In summary, stole apple juice, didn't get in trouble and got to drink the entire gallon of that sweet ass nectar of the gods by myself. I went into CVS for 3 things: deodorant, the specific pencils I like to use, and a notebook. I grabbed the deodorant, perused the office supply aisle and saw they didn't have the pencils I wanted. So I decided it wasn't worth it to get the notebook either. Feeling like my trip was a failure, I left. Walked out of CVS with the deodorant in my hand. No alarm went off, no employee stopped me. About 3 steps outside of the door, I realized I just stole, however unintentionally. So I walked back in. Bought the deodorant and 3 other items out of guilt. Broke into a church, made a mess. Went into the kitchen, made myself a sandwich, snacks, grabbed a soda. Went on my merry way back home. Woke up the next day. Sober me felt guilty. Went back to apologize and pay for any damage. Ended up with a felony. How much damage was there? I figure that's what would be the factor I'd consider when deciding whether or not to turn you in. I got pulled for urinalysis duty in the Navy. The first class in charge at a certain point asked if I was cool and, without actually waiting for an answer, proceeded to toss one of the samples. Presumably it was for a friend who was going to piss hot. I briefly worried that this was a test and Mark Harmon was waiting to see if I would do the right thing. Then I realized it wasn't. Dude was just a shitbag and I should turn him in. But I didn't because it wasn't my turn to give a f***. A few years ago I was working at Waffle House on the graveyard shift. One of my co-workers got really fucked up on shift. Fistful of Xanax plus 2 Four Locos plus bowl of weed. Right at the busy time, she blacks out and face planted onto the waffle iron I had just preheated. She burned a grit mark into her face. I had to pull her off, but some of her face skin came off. Called an ambulance. Never saw her again. Worked the rest of the shift by myself. I was so shook up, was like 17 at the time, that I didn't realize until after I got home that I never cleaned her face skin off the waffle iron before the breakfast rush. So, I accidentally ended up feeding a few people waffles with human face cooked into them.